Yeah, it's coming on.
Okay. All right, so make me a co-host so
Yeah,
I can
I'm
go
going to.
live.
I'm going to put this on silent.
Okay.
Okay, we're ready to start now.
Yeah. Yep. Let me give you a co-host now. We are good, Leroy.
Okay, we're ready to go in 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Good evening, friends and comrades. To this discussion in the series on the Progressive Manifesto, which is a document conceived and put together in association by the People's National Party Youth Organization, 70s Fraternity, as a part of the 50th anniversary celebrations of the PNPYO. Our topic this evening is local democracy. But to give you a brief, so welcome one and all. And I'll first give you a brief overview of what we have done so far. This Progressive Manifesto started in response to the catastrophic defeat of the People's National Party in the elections of September 2020, when it was clear that the party had been abandoned by the voters, in that it got less votes than the previous elections and actually was supported by only 16% of Jamaica's electorate. We scratched our heads for a while and decided asked ourselves what we needed to do. And the answer came back that we needed to recommit ourselves as a party to reforming the two-level economy, which has been existing in Jamaica for some time, the economy of haves and have-nots. We decided that we needed for that two kinds of action. Firstly, where the party was concerned, that we needed certain actions to reform the party. And at the same time, that the party needed to put together a basic program of action, preparing for when it becomes government the next time, a program aimed at reducing the gap between the haves and the have-nots. In this respect, we thought it necessary that the program should be a two-part program, one relating to the party. So we completed the manifesto probably about a year ago. And in the last few months, what we have been doing is having discussions on each of the topics that we raise in that manifesto. Since we have a very short time tonight, I will not go into detail as to what we have proposed in these areas, except to say that we started by discussing the party reforms. We had about 3 sessions concerning the party reforms. And then we have been having discussion programs on the government program that we propose to put forward. We have had 6 such discussions so far. The first on energy, the second on tourism, the third on education, the fourth on agriculture. I will mention a little bit about the last 2 that we have had. The 5th one was on affordable housing and urban upgrading, where we say that we aim to keep, that the government should aim to keep mortgage and rental payments below 30% of families' monthly incomes. That's what we define as affordable housing. That we should aim to reverse the growing residential segregation, that in this respect, the government should require private builders of housing schemes to reserve 30% of their units for middle and low income earners. And on the other hand, any government housing scheme, any housing scheme built by government with it for affordable, to be affordable for house owners, should at the same time offer 50% of the units to upper income earner buyers. Both of these suggestions are in an attempt to reduce segregation in housing. Also, we are suggesting that the government should offer down payment assistance for the poorest aspiring home buyers, and that where rental income is concerned, that the government should start keeping a register of rentals in which they record all the details of any rental units available, and that the landlord would have to advise the government of their intentions before making any changes in their arrangements with their tenants. Where urban upgrading is concerned, we are advocating for local residents to be consulted before there is any such undertaking, and that the local residents, existing residents in an area, before an urban upgrading scheme, should have priority in allocation of the new units once the scheme is completed. Our last discussion was on workers' rights and company governance. And in this respect, we are asking that the government should roll back the erosion of workers' rights that has been happening in recent years through the so-called independent contractor sham, which is increasingly being used by companies. We are asking the government to enact a narrower definition of contractor to protect the workers' rights. We are also asking, as far as company governance is concerned, that the largest of our companies, that is those listed on the stock exchange and having a membership over a certain threshold, that these large companies should be required to have worker representatives on their boards. And we're also saying that government, and in fact the party, even before it becomes government, should have closer dialogue with the trade unions to make sure that once more it acts in protection of workers' rights. So this evening is the 7th of our discussions on policy proposals for a future government where the Progressive Manifesto is concerned. And this evening we look at the area of local democracy. And our presenter will be, before our presenter comes on, I'm going to ask Angela Francis, who is a former executive member of the PNPYO organization, to present to us the person who will be making this evening's presentation on local democracy. So over to you, Angela.
Thank you, Comrade Cook. Good afternoon, comrades. This is an arduous task. How do you introduce someone who needs no introduction? I'll try anyway. This evening's presenter is a former chairman of the PNPYO and also one of its founding members, former general secretary of the People's National Party, and indeed the driving force behind the formation of the 70s fraternity and the YO Past Members Association. And so, comrades, join me in welcoming this evening's presenter, the incomparable Comrade Paul Christopher Burke. Comrade
Right.
Burke, over to you. I did it in 30 seconds.
Good afternoon, everybody. The masses who are here to hear this presentation. It is, as I said, not something that really excites people again as it did in the past. But I want to start by saying we assert, one, democratic governance is to be put more and more into the hands of the people at the local level. Two, community councils, community development committees should be given legal status. Three, municipal councils and local authorities should be given expanded powers and a guaranteed minimum percentage of the government's annual budget. In our discussions, we concluded the declining levels of participation in national elections over the past 2 decades are a threat to our democracy. At its worst, this alienation from the political system is manifested in the growing and seemingly uncontrollable levels of crime. But the criminal lawlessness is only the endpoint of the chronic marginalization of significant segments of the population. Among the working class, urban and rural youths, small farmers, small business people, and even the solid middle class, there's a pervasive sense and reality of powerlessness. The growing commercialization and declining person-to-person character of national elections has played a part. This has been exacerbated by changes in local communities, breakdown in homogeneity, changes in the character and focus of leadership, institutional weaknesses, change in intergenerational relationships, and cultural changes. The task of re-arousing people's interest in democratic participation can more easily be attacked at the level of local community than at the national level. Establishing a framework and machinery to ensure community-level organs are democratically chosen and operated has to be the starting point. The government should review the Community Councils Act 1980 with a view of enacting it with possible modifications as a legal foundation for these efforts. But granting of authority to these community-level councils must be accompanied by endowing them with the necessary resources. Strengthening participation and community democracy. Many Jamaicans fundamentally believe that one of the most important challenges facing the Jamaican people is the building of genuine and effective democratic mechanisms, one through which the mass of our people at the community level can meaningfully and consistently participate in the shaping of policies and programs that affect their lives. For too long, the concept of democracy in Jamaica has been narrowly confined to the holding of elections and the choosing of representatives to shape policies on our behalf. And here I want to quote P.J. Patterson, who was Deputy Prime Minister, speaking at the November 1979 Community Councils Conference. And he said, "Speaking for the government and the party of which I and my colleagues form a part, we have repeatedly reaffirmed our commitment to the democratic process and the deepening of that democratic process, which goes beyond the question of having an election once every 5 years, but seeks to involve the participation of the people in the meaningful decisions which need to be taken as far as their daily lives are affected." As I said, that was P.J. Patterson in 1979. There is still tremendous underdevelopment in many urban and rural communities. This will remain so whether or not there's a change of government, and as long as people are not meaningfully able to participate in their own development. Some would want us to believe that this matter of underdevelopment, which is fundamentally about which individual, some would want us to believe that this matter of underdevelopment is fundamentally about which individual and government leads the country. Regardless of who are the prime ministers and regardless of which party forms the government, underdevelopment in many of our communities will continue without the direct and meaningful participation and involvement of people in dealing with the issues that affect them. The intellectual arrogance of so many of our leaders have many believing that they have the answers and solutions to the people's problems, many of which our present leaders in parliament, business, and church have neither ever faced or experienced. In the view of many, the main cause for this underdevelopment has been a lack of understanding and therefore a lack of appreciation and commitment of genuine community development. I want to again go to another quote by Prime Minister P.J. Patterson in 1979. The community councils as they are envisaged must seek to ensure that this will be so. They must develop dynamic functions relating to the fostering and management of change. In one sense, that is what planning at the national scale is really about. So there needs to be created an organic relationship between the community and the state, and the interaction and relationship must be a reciprocal one. Projects and programs conceived on a national scale can be implemented more successfully with the cooperation and monitoring of community councils. One of the things that we have found is that we need to secure more effective monitoring of all projects and plans. And this must be done not only by improved levels of efficiency in the bureaucracy, but by greater involvement of the community leaders themselves, because they must understand we are not dealing with a remote government that has its responsibility to Whitehall and Westminster, but we are dealing with a government which is responsible and which must be responsive and answerable to the people of Jamaica. That was the mood and thinking of the PNP at that time, as espoused by Deputy Prime Minister Patterson. I want to go quickly into the background of community councils, because many people might have forgotten or not known. And this is really very brief. The first conference of community councils took place at Twickenham Park on the 22nd of February 1978. The Twickenham Park conference had taken place some 40 years after the first community council was established in Jamaica through the instrumentality of Jamaica Welfare Limited. It was the first national conference since the effort in recent years, and those are the years of the 70s, to transform community councils into mass-based organizations and to highlight them as organizations with a potential for playing a leading role in the democratization for development of the Jamaican society. The 1978 Twickenham Park Conference made a request for community councils to be granted legal status with a clearly defined place and role in state administration. Following the Twickenham Park Conference, the proposed structure, role, and responsibilities of the community councils to be embodied in the proposed law were published by Parliament in a Green Paper in October 1978 for public discussion and comment. This Green Paper was widely distributed to hundreds of organizations and indirectly circulated through the newspapers. By 1979, over 500 community councils were registered with the Social Development Commission. The second National Conference of Community Councils, held at the Intercontinental Hotel, Kingston, November 1979, came 1 year and 9 months after that historic first conference. And it is at that meeting that I'm quoting Deputy Prime Minister P.J. Patterson. Based on careful studies of the various responses, The paper was revised in April 1979 and submitted to the Parliamentary Council for the process of legal drafting to begin, and a bill was actually tabled in Parliament in 1980, entitled An Act to make provision for the constitution, registration, and control of community councils and matters connected therewith or incidentally there. So, since then, the SDC has been carrying out an experiment with the community development committees. And there has been some success, but the successes have been far and few between. And really, the community development committees are not empowered, are not resourced, and really depend on the particular leadership. And again, in recent years, and I don't have the information, there seems to be a decline in community development committees. So basically, the people at the community level have no real meaningful participation in how decisions come up from ground up to the policymakers. We want to conclude by some recommendations. This matter of community democracy or local democracy should be a major plank in the party's policy vision proposals. 2, each regional council should hold a special REC meeting to discuss the issue of local democracy, and this is wider and deeper than the reforms and democratization of the local authorities. And I pause here to say, local government reform is needed. Some has taken place, but this is not synonymous to local democracy in its totality. 3, the PNP should be moving to a national conference of community stakeholders in Community Month, usually celebrated in November, in which it can articulate its proposals and receive feedback from stakeholders. And 4, the building of local democracy as one of the party's objectives should be enshrined in the party's constitution. Thank you, and I move back to the chairman, Leroy.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Paul. I see you have tried to keep to the suggested time given on the agenda, which is commendable. Okay, so before coming in myself, I would like to give the opportunity to all the others present to intervene and make your own comments, either on what Paul has presented to us, or more generally on the topic of local democracy in Jamaica, of course. You, of course,
I have a question.
Yes, Becky.
Paul, in regards to the whole local democracy, in regards, is there any consideration given to economy, local economy? Because anything that is not measured is not of importance. That is, if it is not measured, it's not of importance. And I am ignorant in regards to how local economies tie into the national economy. You know, I have been out of Jamaica for a very long time, and what I see and understand in my local situation, I am wondering whether or not anything similar to what I am experiencing exists in Jamaica in terms of how does local economy fit into the national economy? Because what I observe in regards to neglecting Jamaica within rural Jamaica and a lot of other areas in Jamaica is that it appears as if they do not contribute to the national pot, which is a lie. So I yield and await your response.
So Leroy may want to join in this discussion, but I want to remind you that the local democracy as it was conceived in the 70s project was accompanied with a community enterprise organization, which was to give communities a chance to have economic ownership over a particular resource. And quite a few projects started. In the last PNP government, and Butch Ascott really pushed it as minister, there was a local economic development program, right? And the training started. James would have been chairman of the Social Development Commission during the latter part of the government. But the local economic development program, which really was conceived and supported, not in totality, but the original proposals out of a Canadian grant for Caribbean countries, in which Jamaica was selected as one. And I know because during the first part, I chaired the Social Development Commission, and we started what was considered social enterprises. But James might be very useful before, if Leroy wants to say anything, to jump in here. James? James, you are muted. I don't know if you have anything to add. Anyway,
while James is getting himself prepared, let me just take up your invitation, Paul, and to respond to Becky. There are two aspects on the question of community economy, Howard. There are two aspects to it. First of all, if you have had a chance to look at the Community Council's bill of 1980 as it was drafted, which means to say what would have become the law and what we hope can still become the law. Community councils would be graded on two levels. One is basically, well, the basic level of community council, which is what are called provisional community councils. And then once you have existed for a certain period of time and have fulfilled certain criteria, you then would be registered as what the bill calls a finally registered community council. At one time, we were contemplating calling it a chartered community council, but this is a high-level community council. Okay, the first aspect of community economy would concern all community councils of whatever level. And that is that community councils would all have the power to make recommendations concerning proposed projects. Not just their own projects, including government projects and so on. Of course, they would also have the power of making representation to government bodies, councillors, members of parliament, and so on. But the second aspect concerns those community councils who would receive final registration, which is to say the higher level community councils who have fulfilled certain criteria. Specifically, the bill says, the registration as finally registered community councils would make them bodies corporate with perpetual succession. In other words, they would have rights similar to that of a company, right? They would have the right to hold property. And that is very important, the right to hold property. And the implications, what are some of the implications of holding property? Obviously, it means that you could entrust the community council ownership of the lands of certain lands in the community, such as the parks and the gardens and so on. Sporting facilities, community centers, and so on could now belong to the community through the community council. And obviously they would be able to establish enterprises, whether it be agriculture, like farms, depots, packing houses, equipment rental, or so on, shops, childcare centers, tourism centers, whatever. So this would be the basis for them playing an active role in community, in the economy of the community, to the extent that they would have the legal power to own property, as well as being empowered to make plans on behalf of the community. Okay.
And I was suggesting, Mr. Chair, I know that a lot of things have been done in that area. I was suggesting that James, because Becky's question is a very important question, right? How does it tie in? People need to be motivated. How does it tie in their economic development? How does it create wealth in the community, not for a few, but for the many, right? How does it change intergenerational poverty, right, at the community level, right? And I think we have more dots to connect. And as I said, the last experiment, James would have been chairman of the SDC with the local economic development program. So James could probably just tell us what happened and what were some of the challenges.
Okay, yes. That was well, as you know, I was there for a relatively brief period. I don't know that as an organization, we put as much effort into it as was needed. But as you know, Paul, there were a lot of distractions at the time and so on. And one finds you see that when you're working on these things with people who don't have a kind of ideological commitment and a theoretical grasp of the thing, quite often the work goes differently from what we intend. I don't know if that was your experience, right? But I know that there were a few experiments, efforts. We allowed, some people to become involved and try to promote it. But honestly, I can't give you a kind of, what we call that now, accounting or accounting sheet of that at this point in time. I would have had to do a little research in my SDC board records, which I didn't do.
There is one enterprise I would like to comment on, which many people don't realize, which grew out of a community council. And if we had had the law, no doubt that enterprise would now be one of would now have been an outstanding community enterprise. And that is the Walker's Wood Company.
Okay.
I am talking about the company that you can go in the supermarkets and buy jams and jellies and sauce and sauces and stuff like that, made by the Walker's Wood Company. This actually grew out of the Walker's Wood Community Council.
But
This
not
was initially
owned by the
project.
community again, Leroy.
What said?
It's no longer owned by the
No,
community.
I know that. That's the point I'm making. I'm saying it could have been, because it grew out of the community council. And if we had such a law, then certainly something like that and others, could have developed into viable businesses. I recall, because I was, perhaps you don't, I was at one time, for a short time relatively, responsible for steering the efforts of the community council development within the SDC. And at that time, there were quite a few such embryonic enterprises. In Portland, for example, I remember there was one tourism-related enterprise that was starting up around the non-such caves and other such things. So I think that provided these community organizations, whatever we call them, Paul refers to them as community development committees. The point is that the community councils.
No, Leroy, let me help you.
No.
SDC.
No. The point I'm making is, the bill does not require, does not insist that you call your community organization a community council. It defines a community council in a certain way, and you can call the organization anything you want to call it. But a community council has to do with not only with development, but with other aspects of community governance. The point I'm making, however, is that the basic thing that is missing is the legal status, the legal empowerment of these organizations to be able to drive these efforts, to develop the community economy. And if they had such legal status, then they would be empowered to do quite a bit in that area, I think.
If I could add, and not to dominate, this has been one of the weaknesses in our whole approach to development. Not following through with empowering community organizations. Leroy is correct. Whatever name, whether they want to call it citizen association, once they met certain requirements, they would have been allowed to register under the Community Councils Act. It was Minister Arnold Bertram and his team that felt that to put the word development in it, right? Initially, I was a little bit hesitant, but accepted it because I said, boy, if they're going to empower it, it doesn't matter the name, right? Oh. And we were hoping that it would have been empowered, right? I believe, members, audience, that this has to be a major plank of the PNP's programs going forward. But it has to be believed and accepted, because as I was saying to Leroy earlier today, in the 70s, Michael was pushing it, and he really was, right? Patterson, I don't remember why Michael didn't come. Michael was either off the island and Patterson deputized for him at the conference at Oceana. If people could feel the energy of the people, their hope, their belief that some power would come into their hands. I remember being there and going through the workshops, and they were talking about technology. I mean, if you, Norman Gervin led a workshop, when you listen to the discussions and the ideas and the enthusiasm that was coming from the floor, all when supper time came, people were still, well, not me, I went and had my supper, but people were still in discussions on the floor. And James, luckily I did, because the conference was oversubscribed, and had to go and cook food again because they ran out of food, right? But, the kind of energy and enthusiasm and passion that I saw then and there, that people felt the vision, saw the hope, and wanted to see that they had some say at their community level, right? And I believe it has to be a plank in the PNP going forward that will separate us from the Jamaica Labour Party.
I want to say something about that Oceana conference, because I was in charge of that. I was in charge of the community council's drive at that time. The first conference that we held in February 1978 at the School of Agriculture at Twickenham Park. As you said, there were probably about 400 community councils represented there. That was a one-day conference. a one-day conference. People came in and went back home the same day. The second conference, the following year, October 1979, was planned to be a two-day conference. And we planned to have it at the hotel in Kingston. And I insisted to the regional managers of the SDC that they should get their community councils to pay for their representatives to stay at the hotel. We were not going to subsidize them. And all of the community councils who represented and sent delegates to stay overnight at the Ocean Hotel paid for their delegates to come. We didn't pay.
And you had to put some up at the Pegasus. We were overbooked.
Wherever they stayed, they paid for themselves, not personally. Their councils paid for them. That showed that it was not like paper groups or paper organizations that we had at the time, but we had serious people who were seriously interested in the welfare and development of their communities.
But Comrade Paul, Comrade Leroy, one of the things because I was involved too. I think I was certainly at the first conference. I don't remember being at the second, but I was involved, very much involved at the ground level. I remember we had meetings in St. Anne's Bay, Brownstown, etc. We brought together a good number of people to discuss and put up ideas. But one of the things that was never too clear to me is what is the organic link between the council and the actual community. I remember Scree making a criticism that none of us know or can properly define what a community, that no community maybe even exists. So what is it represented? Now, of course, communities exist and they tend to know themselves, but quite often I found, as I did with the CDCs, that it is activists. Now, I don't mean political activists as such, or party activists, and nothing is wrong with party activists. But quite often the people who came up and were in the councils had nominated themselves, meaning, you know, in any community you have active people. And quite often what they were doing did not necessarily have any link with the communities that they represented. So that, for example, in my village, we can call it that still, we would have a community council, but I am not sure that we really were cognizant of the wishes and so on of 80% of the people in a conscious way. Now, we, of course, had an idea, we know what the community, what some of the shortcomings are and so on, but I didn't get the sense that they were sufficiently deeply embedded in the community to, you know, be an organic representative. And that is maybe one of the reasons why they were never able to mobilize that kind of social force that would overcome the challenges that they face subsequently. And we haven't said much about that. But Comrade Burke will remember, and you should remember to Comrade Leroy, that when we had that, was it an NEC at the same School of Agriculture where the thing was discussed, the councillors were bitterly opposed to it. Right?
You know,
you remember? You don't remember that?
James, I remember. But okay, so it's 2 sessions of that. But I want to comment and I want to agree with you that, remember, we were beginning and part of the legislation would have forced community councils to have been democratic. There was a view, and some people felt it should be organized on a divisional basis, right? There should be a divisional executive, the community councils, and there's a divisional. There were all kind of views being expounded about how it should be structured. I know that the Rockford Community Council, when I learned about it, there was no general meeting. Some people are just named as chairman and secretary, etc., etc., right? So you are correct in some instances. But I want to believe that as people would have got involved and mobilized, then the internal democratic process, the constitution of the councils would have started to make sure that they were more participatory. Now you are correct. I don't know if it was a minority, an articulate minority that helped to kill it within the PNP. But I certainly know, and I was telling Leroy today, that when Roy McGann got up, and I seem to feel it was at a UWI meeting. I don't know. But the first time I heard him get up, he lambasted the situation that the chairman of the Maryland Community Council was a known laborite. And he says, is this the man you want to be giving out bushing work in the community? Is this the man you want to be giving out all road repair? It came down to bullet work. Who would be in charge of bullet work? And I'm a Russian getting up and echoing that him a MP and him now sharing a poise, him run things in a West Central. Right? Him now want a community council. Russian was very blatant about not wanting community councils. Right? So I don't know how the councillors might have spoken, but I know 2 MPs at that time were loud and clear that they did not want community councils, or they shouldn't have the right to have that kind of power to discuss how benefits were going to be distributed or shared.
Same thing with the council.
Let me tell you how the law, the bill, eventually worked out these things. Yes, you could have a group which started with 6 people and called itself a community council, right? And could be registered as a professional community council. But in order to get final registration and enjoy all the powers of what we propose to call a chartered community council, you would have to satisfy certain criteria which would make you more and more democratic. You would have to have had a certain number of meetings of a committee. You would have had to have had a general meeting, you know, and this was under the supervision of the SDC. You would have had to have had a general meeting. You would have had to have a certain number of monthly meetings during a certain period of time, at least a year. And anybody in the community could not be prevented from joining the community council. And you also had to show that you had membership of a certain percentage of the community. What is a community? The community could define itself. In other words, when you set up a community council and apply for registration, you would say that we want to take in these villages or these districts or this area. And you would be registered as such, as long as there is no objection from any adjoining area. Obviously, if somebody from an adjoining area, like say you started one in Parry Town, right, and then people from Pimento Walk decide they want to start one, then that comes a time when the minister has to decide where is the boundary between Parry Town and Pimento Walk, and proceed like that. Where the councillor is concerned, because there was a lot of opposition, yes, from councillors who felt that instead of helping councillors, as was supposed to be the intention way back in the 1947, when the local government got its first came on adult suffrage, it was proposed that councillors should have what was then called district councils, right, which would work in conjunction with the parish councillors. The solution we came up with was, since a parish councillors area of representation was called a division, we would now call it a divisional council, and to say that all of the community councils within a particular parish council division would send representatives to a divisional council, and that the parish councillor would ex officio be the chairman of that divisional council, unless he did not wish to take up that position. So there was a place for the councillor within the structure that was envisaged at the time. Obviously, any tribal politician is going to fight against such a unless your party controls the area 100%. You're not, the tendency has been for these politicians not to want to see other interests and other ideas represented at all. But but once the community council got legal representation, I think it is absolutely sure. I mean, not legal representation, legal empowerment, legal status. I'm absolutely sure that more and more people would become involved and see the necessity to become involved in the community council. And the more democratic it would become.
Leroy, in going forward, we have to learn from the lessons of the past. What were the challenges, what we tried to do, and what was the mistakes. But I think we just need to focus first. Is the principle of local democracy one that is important for the development of our communities? Is the absence of local democracy part of the reason for the underdevelopment of our communities? If we conclude that local democracy, I might have to tweak how we define it in totality, right? Because the local authorities are a part of local democracy, but many people have come to equate that local government is local democracy, and it starts and ends there, and that is very unfortunate. But us understand that local democracy involves people at the community level being able to shape policies that impact on their lives and their communities, right? And to work with other institutions, whether it be Ministry of Health to deal with how the community council is run, whether it's the schools, whether it's economic projects, right? If we believe that local democracy is important, then we have to commit ourselves to make it work. And it is going to be difficult. It is going to be challenging, particularly in the mindset today, when there are no champions among our politicians and our councillors to promote local democracy as we understand it, rather than local government, not just a citizens association at ball when water knock off, or people who protest when police kill somebody in their community, but people wanting to be involved in policy development, right? How the country is run, starting from their community.
Okay, so
your brother, your brother Leroy was a big champion of people power and local democracy, which he tied in as one and the same.
Yeah, I am convinced that if we had legally recognized and legally empowered local community organizations, then they would do a lot to alleviate many of the problems that plague Jamaica today. Take, for example, security. It was envisaged that a legally registered, legally empowered community council would, for example, have a security committee, right? And that it would have, and that that community council would have direct relations with the police inspector or whatever, who would be an ex officio member, on that committee, that they would take whatever action, not well within the law, of course, in terms of looking after the security of their community. That district constables, that, for example, that they would have a role in recommending district constables from their community who would be a key. Remember this effort, which was at the time called home guards, right? When we're talking about appointing home guards, which I think was a very good idea, within the framework of the community council, it was seen that these home guards would come under the umbrella of the community council. And certainly these community organizations would this network of community organizations could play a critical role in terms of local intelligence as far as criminal activity is concerned. Similarly for justices of the peace, I believe that is a natural area where the community council should have the right to make recommendations for nominating justices of the peace. And well, we know about health, because at the time when Ken McNeil and Winter Davidson headed up the Ministry of Health, they had very active community health committees with community health aides, which would fit in naturally with the community governance structure of these locally empowered community councils. So and you can go to a number of areas where I think there's a natural link, and there could have been a natural link where the community council could play a role, not just in terms of the MP and the councillor, but in terms of these subject areas and these various agencies and so on, to link the community and have access to these government services and to guide these government services and strengthen them as well.
The question I have is, going forward, understanding the type of cynicism that exists within the society at the moment, based off, in your introduction, you had spoken about 16% of the electorate voted for PNP, right? And overall, during 2020, overall, it was about 30% of the electorate that participated in the election, right? Which speaks to a high level of cynicism within the society. In terms of community councillors, Paul spoke to it, really democracy at the local level would require full participation or majority participation within any particular community. Now, the ideas are being created, or the ideas are being created by us, people who support a particular party. But in regards to the implementation, require full participation. What are the steps that we are thinking of taking in terms of breaking down this whole partisanship in order to implement community enterprises or community councils in the future? Because you need the majority participation in terms of, in order for this to be successful. It can't be a group of partisan people who dominate the information and then wanting to incorporate other people and then having them see it as being partisan. How you plan to address this issue?
Becky, I think the first thing is for the party itself to decide that it supports this thing.
Okay.
And to pass and to put a law in place. Okay. I think the first thing, because the main problem there are several communities that you could go to in Jamaica. You will always find people who are interested in the community and have the interest of the community and will lead the community in terms, take steps to lead the community in terms of the good and welfare of the community. But to the extent that they do not have legal power to do certain things, their efforts will always be undermined. So I think the first thing is to put in place the law. Once you have the law, I think you will have more and more participation. I think it is unreasonable to expect. You said a majority, but in fact, it's unreasonable to expect that even most of the people in the community are going to participate, on a regular basis. But I put it to you that even if you have a regular, it depends on the size of the community, of course, and the community defines what size it is going to be. But even if you have 5% of the community actively involved, I think that would be a major step forward. Because there is hardly any community in Jamaica today where you have as much as 1% of the community involved in such efforts. So I say if you have 5%, that is good. The bill as drafted had said that the community council should have at least 10% involvement of the adult membership of the community as members before it be given empowered legally with all of the powers. And I think that's a starting point. And once the community has important things that trouble it, and once the citizens as a whole understand that the body has the legal power to do certain things, they will not stay outside, and they will and nobody will be able to keep them outside. So I don't think you start out with majority interest and majority participation. I think you start out with a nucleus which will be very small and which will grow over time in step with the legal powers and the noted progress of the community, and in keeping with the extent to which people see what can be done for and against them by such an organization.
So you're saying that there would be no need for community education?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that.
Okay.
Not saying
because well, my question is in that vein, in regards to, because you have to educate the community on the concept before you create the law. Because if you create the law and a vast majority of the community do not understand the law, then you have people who are going to exploit that part of the situation.
I disagree.
Leroy, can I intervene? So Becky, I understand your point. I think the two processes are simultaneous. You have to give people a platform that give them some kind of empowerment. Because why else are they going to get involved again? They have to feel that people's time is not like in the 70s and 80s. People are working, people have them family, people are studying, people have television, 1,001 things to compete, right?
iPad.
You have clubs, you have everything. So you have to give people a reason, right? I say we start first by understanding the importance of local democracy. It is not going to be a perfect system. It's going to take time to rebuild, right? It will take us probably about 5 years with serious sustained effort to get back to where we were in 78, right? We have better means of communications, we have technology, but Leroy, I think we had changed this community development constitution to 5% registered. right? We have 15,000 people on the voters list in Norman Gardens, for example. And there are about 5 communities in Norman Gardens. So you have easily roughly about 3,000 in each, right? It will build, but to get 300 people registered and paying their subscription with this level of hesitancy, cynicism, not knowing, is going to be a major challenge at the outset. At the outset, right?
Paul, may I ask a question? Community councils, how viable or how active are the community councils today?
All right, Leroy, by me. There are a few, and this is part of the problem. If you say, show us a successful community council, there are a relatively few of them that function in the way they were to do. We're not talking about just calling a meeting and saying the community council meeting. But Leroy's point about the absence of a framework and the absence of a legal face that they can own property and operate businesses is part of the problem, right? Why they have not been able to grow. So what they do, they meet when there's a crisis situation for the most time. And when they meet, sometimes it's 10, 15 people, right? I know the Old Harbor Old Harbor had an excellent development council. James, with the SDC, really active, very vibrant, right? But when the particular person left as chairman because he had to leave for some other thing, the thing just died.
Yeah, it tend to happen.
Right?
I know Discovery Bay had one.
But then it goes back to what Betty was saying, that probably there needs to be some education or reintroduction, you know, in terms of the importance
That's the key.
of these councils. And,
Yeah,
you know,
but
who is the government, which government agency is responsible
I can
for,
tell
you
you.
know, for these community councils or really
The SDC.
responsible
I
for.
think Jennifer
It's a
Clark
challenge.
wants to make a point, Leroy, Mr. Chairman. Jennifer Clark, who is a councillor candidate for the Waterloo Division, wants to make a point.
Yes. Can you come
Good
in,
night,
Jennifer?
comrades.
Yes.
Comrades, let me tell you, to form a council, it is very, very challenging because the people are not motivated, and it doesn't matter the different strata that they're from. I'm part of the Grand Spend CDC, and let me tell you, God bless the number of persons who come to that meeting. Even when you take it local, even to form a party group is like pulling teeth. I don't know what kind of motivation they need. And if you go up to the higher echelon, them worse. Because them a poser. Just to say that they're the president of whatever. It's hard. I don't know. The culture of volunteerism is almost dead. And I have to be, even in my own division, you know, I have to be beating life into it. To the point where people think I'm too harsh and I come across as too brash with them. Because it gets to me sometimes. But if they want benefits, everybody ready. Everybody ready to collect. But nobody wants to do the groundwork.
So it boils down to education, to educating the communities. And it has to start from not just with the people in the areas, but the MPs and the councillors have to be very involved and let the people understand that this is to their benefit and how they can benefit from it, with supporting documents and stuff that, you know, the government has provided.
They want to see the benefit.
And you make a valid point because
well, at the PNP government, I'm thinking.
Right. Yeah, because I can tell you, even with them on the opposite side, they don't turn up at any meetings, you know.
And this is it. That's why I say from the top down needs educating on the whole thing, that how it can benefit their constituency.
But
Go
You
ahead.
as
can't
far
really benefit if there is not a framework that make the people feel that it's not a talk shop. The
I
people
Exactly.
totally
are,
agree with you, Paul.
the
Exactly.
people are tired of talk.
Oh,
Talking.
yes.
on the question of education, which is very important, very, very important. That has to start, obviously, with the party accepting that this is something it wants to do. And once the party accepts that it's something it wants to do, that education starts within the party
Mm-hmm.
and by the party and the party group members within the constituency.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, eventually, with the SDC playing the kind of role it used to play back then in terms of this education. And then this education will be taken up by the leadership of the community. But I think that might be we are a bit over demanding as far as communities are concerned. Do you know do you know what what is the quorum? Do you know what is the quorum for a registered company in Jamaica? Who knows what is a quorum
I don't know.
under the law, the Companies Act, the quorum for a company?
Remember one person.
Exactly. It used to be two. It's now one. It's now one.
One.
One. Yes, one. You can
Yeah,
form
but
a
like
company
credit,
with one
I
person. The
know.
quorum is one.
Yeah, but I'm more
So to
like
have
it is a credit union.
12 individuals in a community coming together and acting together, I think is a big, big thing if they do so on a regular basis. And like with many of these companies, whenever an important issue arises that the shareholders are interested in, and you see a packed auditorium at a general meeting, you will have that same thing in a community whenever there is an important issue that the members in the community decide that they want to have a say in. On a day-to-day basis, you're always going to have a hardcore taking up leadership. What is important is to have a mechanism, a legal mechanism that the people know is there, that can represent them, that can talk, that can work on their behalf. And when the time comes, they can participate if they feel to. And the more important the subjects and the more power that that body has, the more they will want to participate in it. It doesn't work the other way around, where you have 95% of the community interested in this thing, and then you form an organization. Nothing, it does not like that.
I agree with you with that, Leroy. But at the same time, there's also the issue of accountability. Any 10 or 12 people come together, and that's been some of my observation. They come together and they have their own perspective, they have their own agenda, which does not necessarily reflect what any significant proportion of the population and the community want. So I think what we need to do in I agree about the education and the party, because philosophically our party has this, the JLP doesn't really have any regard for such things. So if it is going to happen, it has to happen through the PNP. It's just that we now have to reconvince the PNP, because a lot of people in the PNP, especially newer ones who have come up, are not on that track. They don't have that tradition that we have. They are heavily influenced by the atomism of the contemporary world, so to speak, right? And they're doing consciousness of community and all of that on a day-to-day basis. What I think we need to do is, yes, form the core of people who will be that cadre that's going to carry the message. But we have to carry the message also to the communities. We have to mobilize the communities in terms of educating them, showing them the possibilities, etc. Now, to my mind, a community council is really like an executive body. The community should meet periodically. In other words, you have an AGM and you have a minimum attendance. The credit union, I don't remember if it's 7% or whatever percentage for the AGM. Depends on the size of the credit union. Because we know that you can't, 30, 40, 50,000 people not going to come. So you have a thing. Same thing with the community. But the people who are in that leadership must have some obligation to consult with or to provide opportunities for consultation and for feedback from all the people in the defined area. So I think it's important that we work that out. Now, there's a tendency in Jamaica and in many societies that people like us redefine what is the community. I think we can develop the thing in a process of the communities defining themselves, using the SDC, using the PNP, whatever other machinery is available. But let the communities more or less define themselves so that we don't have the kind of overlap somebody mentioned before. That, like many of these communities are legally defined anyway, in terms of what is on the titles and that kind of thing. But whatever it is, the point I'm making is that I believe it needs to have a certain level of mobilization, right, to create the excitement, to create the interest. Then now, what I would see as a council is a kind of leadership body, but it must not be just a leadership body. Yes, it must have legal implications, it must have its legal powers and so on, but it must also be rooted in the broader community that it supposedly represents, and it is a council for, and the people in that broader community must have opportunities, whether it be people's assemblies, whatever we want to call them, street assembly, divisions are big. I would more look at, a section, like you would have a village assembly, a street assembly in an urban area, or a segment, whatever it is. And so people will come out and they meet periodically, whether it be once every 6 months, once every, whatever it is. And the people who in the leadership report. And there has to be some kind of selection or election. I don't know that the people in the community council should just be people who happen to want to be there. They should be ratified in some way by a broader group. And I think that is how we are going to rebuild the kind of sense of democracy and the incentive or the ambition for participation. Because right now it is, in many respects, is not there. Jennifer mentioned it, that the people don't come out. And it's not just it's not perversity on their part. As somebody said, many of them don't come out because they don't see the point. They come in just to listen to some people talking. Now, the people who love to talk always come out, right? And they come out and they talk. But the bulk of people don't really want to talk. They maybe want certain things done. And so we need to provide that kind of framework and that kind of forum where this thing can happen. If it is going to work, I think it has to be mobilized so that there is a kind of mass pressure for it and show people the possibilities in theory. And we can't articulate all of it here. But one of the things we need to do, for example, to my mind, is to show people, and I'm assuming we are the government now, that you take things to people, but whether you're going to fix the road, whether, how to fix the road, whether you're going to build a pool, how you're going to address the thing. In other words, the things that are of interest to the people, we work through those to get the interest going eventually, initially, and then we take it from there.
There's
Go ahead.
Comrade Burke, Comrade Burke, sorry.
Yeah.
One of the things we need to move away from too, because you see, every time, even within the party, we keep talking about political education, but we're not doing it. You know, one of the things I dread, God forbid, and I'm serious, but it's not for you to feel anyway. I polluted. If you should pass today, I don't know what will happen to us in terms of political education and our history, because I see no one else who could carry this mantle. So right here in the party, we are facing the same thing that we're discussing right now, you know. How do we move? We need to move from the talk shop. We need to get radical. And radical not necessarily mean go to the Black Road and all these things, you know. It means that we get serious and deal with the issues that needs to be dealt with. Frontal. We need to stop talking now and start act. We need to start fashion ourselves like the government. We are the government and do things because they don't have any sense, you know. And I'm just being, you know, me not be facetious. Me just talk truth. At least it's my truth. And we know what to do. And we have the vision. We have the people. We have the talent. But we just sit on our laurels and just talk. I'm sick and tired of talking now.
All right. May I say something about local democracy?
Yes, Paul.
We're running out of time. I don't know how much excitement, if any, there is in the People's National Party to reintroduce this. But I believe that perhaps one of the approaches could be if we could find a member of parliament and a councillor who understood the potential and understood that it's not about partisan interest, but it will pay dividends to work with an existing community development council. Because Che Guevara says a good example is contagious, right? So the community councils the leadership needs training. That is one of the things. The leadership of community councils need training. But I don't think we should spend today going into the mechanisms. I think that our bigger challenge is not to talk how they work. It's how to convince the People's National Party's leadership that this is a desirable thing. Right? Because if we stay here and talk about all the problems and not see the potential and opportunities, we will demotivate ourselves. Right? Because there are real issues, Jennifer. Everything you say is absolutely correct. But for every problem, there is a solution. We have not been consistent in finding the solutions, working with the people on the ground to find the solutions. Because too often we think the solutions are in our heads. And I can tell you, in any community, the SDC defines 788 communities in Jamaica. You can find 20 committed people to community development. In the 788, you can find 20 committed people. The point James makes, how do we expand participation, is real, but you have to start somewhere. And if those people, one of the things the SDC put in the last constitution, which was term limits for the president, so it was not held on to a two-year term limits. So the maximum period a man could do was 4 years, right? And we put in a chairman as different from the
sometimes
president.
that's the maximum life of the organization, as Jennifer was saying. When the one, as you were saying it, when the one leader gone, that's the end of it.
in some
I'm
cases.
just being facetious. Go on.
In some cases. But the conclusion I want us, is this a point? Is this a battle, Leroy and comrades, that you're saying it murmuring when you point it out? How many people, if I asked to poll the PNP leadership, granted they have not been exposed to these discussions, but not even interested in the discussion, because they see themselves as leaders with the solutions to do their little work in the communities and get feedback. But it's not about expanding leadership. It's not about devolution of power. It's not about decentralization. It's not about expanding democracy for most of them. They are not of that philosophical outlook, Leroy.
So who have any connection to the people who draft the manifesto for the party? Because this information, if you have the connect, okay.
No, not that. I'm saying we're at 8:48, and I'd love to have the chairman conclude the meeting.
Yeah, I take the
I'm
hint.
48 in New York.
I take the hint, Paul.
I'm sorry,
And
but Paul and Leroy, could
I
you
take
just
the hint that I'm going to act on it.
Well, I think James wants to make one last
Yeah,
intervention,
Yeah,
with your permission.
no,
we don't want to be too.
James will make the second to last. I will make the last.
All right.
Yes,
Yeah,
James.
we don't want to be too pessimistic. Remember, you know, there are actually organizations in Jamaica that work, right? Churches for one. There are some youth clubs, some CDCs. So I think it's not that we are starting with an empty table or tabula rasa, as they call it. One of the things I think we will need, and we need to convince the party to do, is to go out and interact with the existing organizations. Like we have the JAS, that's how we were formed. Make use of what is there now and start there. So we're not starting with a blank sheet. There is something that we can work with, and that helps us to find the people who are the active people, the people Paul talk about, the 20 or the 30 people who are community-oriented, community builders, and then we go from there. So let us not be too pessimistic. There is potential out there, and there's material. Once we identify it, that will help us to move forward. Yeah, that's
okay. Let me take the chairman's privilege just to remind that I am in fact the chairman. Chairman, the chairman's privilege of saying that I agree that and accept, I think we all accept that the party, the People's National Party, at present is not really very much interested in what we are talking about as far as community empowerment and local democracy is concerned. So this is one of the battles, the intellectual battles that we have to carry on within the party at first. But I also want to say that as far as community representation is concerned, there are organizations right now that do take part in community representation, and those are essentially what? The PNP groups and the JLP branches. The problem is that obviously those groups or branches only get their voices heard when their own party has the member of parliament, and when the member of parliament is from their party. Right? So that when you have a PNP member of parliament, it's only the PNP groups who represent the constituency, who represent the community. And when there's a JLP member of parliament, it's only the JLP branches who represent the community. And there's another problem, that in some constituencies represented by a PNP MP, that MP refuses to listen to the PNP groups anyway, because he feels he knows everything, and he doesn't need he or she doesn't need that advice or thing from the local group or the local branch. With a legally constituted and legally empowered community organization, it allows all the members and leaders of the PNP group and of the JLP branch to be in the same organization and to represent the constituency, and for the member of parliament, whether JLP or PNP, to have to listen to that organization, because that organization will have the legal right and the legal power to do certain things and to intervene in certain things. So I am convinced that if we take a close reading of the Community Council's Bill of 1980, there is only one thing I would change in it now before putting it into effect. And that is the fine that was envisaged at the time for people who contravened the law. And that fine at the time was supposed to be maximum fine of $100, which would be equivalent to about $20,000 in today's money. So apart from that, if it were left to me, with all that you have said about, that I have heard said tonight about the need for mobilization and education and involvement and so on, I would start by putting the law into effect. It wouldn't mean that every community immediately would have a community council, but it would mean that they have the right and the ability, if and when they choose, to set up and be part of such a thing. And as Paul said, a good example. There is nothing like a good example. So I think one of the things we need to do is to identify the organizations which exist today, whether they call themselves community councils, community development associations, or whatever. Identify them and put them up before the party and before the public as examples to emulate. Give them the legal power and let them run with it, and see how many other communities won't run with them. So thank you very much, comrades, for taking part in this discussion tonight. And we should meet in a couple of weeks' time for another interesting discussion, which we will keep you informed about. And hopefully we will have enough notice and enough interest to have not only a quality audience as we had this evening, but also a quantity audience. Thank you very much. And I'm signing off.
Thank you, Leroy. Good night, comrades.
Comrades.
It was a good discussion.
Could you tell me about that draft of the Community Council law? Well, after whatever we call it, because I know you sent it out earlier on. I'm not
I
sure.
will share it on the notification platform, and I summarize my presentation. I will send my full, which I did not read all of it. I'll also send that to everybody on the.
What he asked for, Paul, was the community councils.
I know, I heard.
Yeah.
Okay. And Paul, I'd email you for a copy of the Vanguard code.
I saw it.
So I didn't receive it.
Yeah, I can't jump to you, Angela, but you email it today and you want me to jump to you. I'm doing many other things, you know.
Send out a copy to the main group, the planning group.
Of course.
Each members.
It's
All right.
9:56 in New York, Paul.
Yeah. Comrades, good night. I'm
Good
closing
night,
down.
Good night. Good night.
Good night, Leroy.
Hi, Sharon.
Sharon.
Hi.
All right.
Thank you as usual.
Good night.
Good night.
Explain those things.